Welcome to the Miami Tech Pod. This is episode 65. We have the legendary Bryan Norcross here as our guest. Bryan has been a critical part of Miami's weather and news infrastructure for the last 40, 50 years almost.
Almost 40 years in Miami.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Crazy.
it's quite an honor to have you as our guest, Bryan. Thank you so much for joining us. Our usual hosts, Maria is with me today, and Caesar and Will are out this week, but they will be listening in and giving us feedback after this. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you who don't know who you are, the three people living under a rock or who just moved here to Miami, like, how do you like to best sort of introduce yourself?
Well, I'm a hurricane specialist these days. That's really all I do. For many years, for 25 years, I did the daily weather in one fashion or the other on South Florida TV. But when Hurricane Andrew came along in 1992, what I realized from that experience, which was a life-changing experience for anybody that really went through the heart of it, I realized how little I knew about hurricanes and how much there was to know, and how much we needed to improve the systems we use to deal with them. And I got involved with the building codes and insurance and all that kind of thing, appointed by the governor and the insurance commissioner at the time, later Senator Bill Nelson, and that's become really the focus of what I work on. And now that's all I work on, and it's all I've worked on really going back more than 15 years now.
So we would love to kind of hear, I feel like anyone over the age of, let's say 35 who lived in Miami and experienced Hurricane Andrew, definitely you're a legend. But I would love to kind of get the background on how you ended up in Miami, kind of going back to your parents, and then how you ended up from DJ to meteorologist. So if you kind of tell us that progression.
Yeah. I have an unusual background for people that do what I do. Most all TV weather people, if you ask them, well, why are you a TV weather person? How did you get into meteorology? In fact, most meteorologists, if you ask them, they'll tell you, oh, there was this storm when I was a kid, and it's a hurricane, a tornado, a blizzard, or something, right? And I was just so fascinated. I stood at the window, I just watched it, and I decided that's what I want to do at the time I was 7 years old or something. I mean, essentially everybody I know tells that story, but that's not me. I was a completely different thing. So when I was a kid, first of all, my father was an engineer. And when President Kennedy announced that we were going to the moon, essentially the government said, calling all engineers, and they ended up hiring about 400,000 engineers and tech people to make the Apollo program work. I mean, it was a brute force, create the technology, invent everything kind of effort. And we moved down to the Cape Canaveral area. I grew up in a little town called Indialantic, which is across from Melbourne, right on the beach. And I was a surfer and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of appreciated the weather. And there were a couple hurricanes that came by, which were pretty exciting, but whatever. What I was really interested in were two things. First of all, I loved radio. I would sit in my room with my little transistor radio, listening to radio stations, which you could listen to at 9 a.m. back then, from New York and Chicago. And I loved listening to the way that the different radio stations were programmed, and understanding the fundamental fact that every radio station, like in this case, talking about top 40 stations, like the stations, the pop stations, everyone could play the same music, but some radio stations sounded better than others. So there had to be some art involved in combining the music and the disc jockeys and the jingles and the news and everything, and combining all that together. And it turned out to be a pretty profound thing, which I used much later in my career. But I would study it. I would study how they did it. I thought, to me, that was very interesting. The other thing was I was a sciencey guy. I was a kind of a math and physics, chemistry kind of guy. Math was always the easiest thing for me. And when I was 8th grade and 9th grade for the science fair, I built this little computer thing made out of wood called a residue adder, using something called residue arithmetic. which was an interesting idea in the early days of computing because it was a finite number system. You didn't have to worry about numbers getting beyond a certain size, and you could add and subtract without carrying. So it was a kind of a tricky way to make an easy computer. So my father told me about residue arithmetic, and I thought that was really cool. And so I made a computer to do that when I was 13 or 14 or something like that. Anyway, so I was kind of techie and sciencey back then. Built kits of various radios and all that kind of stuff. So that went on until I got into actually in high school. I went to a local radio station and said, well, if you'll let me be on the radio, I won't charge any money. So it was this new radio station that started in Melbourne, AM station. They're playing kind of progressive top 40 music. So this was in the days that Janis Joplin came along, and Cream and Vanilla Fudge and Iron Butterfly and various things. We also played during the day. We played some pop music. So I remember the day that Hey Jude came out. It was coming out on a Monday. We got an advanced copy. And when I walked in that Sunday for my shift, the record was sitting there. The 45 was sitting there with a note on it, play this every 15 minutes. Well, that was a long song. As I recall, that was 7 minutes and something by the time they sang Hey Jude over and over and over again at the end, right? And there were a lot of commercials to play. So basically that Sunday, I played Hey Jude in commercials, and that was maybe an occasional song stuck in there. But so I was a disc jockey, and I went to Florida State. I'm going to Florida State, and I got a job in the local radio station as a top 40 disc jockey. It was very, very, very fun playing the jingles, doing all that stuff I'd listened to on the radio all the time. Bop, 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 bop. In fact, it's on YouTube. If you look up Brian Norcross, WTAL Tallahassee, you'll hear me in January of 1969 being a top 40 disc jockey. And I loved that, but I couldn't make any money at it. And eventually I ended up in the stereo business, which I had done as a teenager, repairing stereos. And that's what I did, put myself through school. And that led me eventually to being an engineer at the local campus TV station, which back then meant changing videotapes really quickly on videotape machines. I really didn't do much engineering, but that was all in the engineering department back then. Then when I graduated, I didn't know what to do. So I just thought, let me just go to Atlanta and see if I can find a job at a TV station there. And sure enough, got hired as an engineer, and that that became a maintenance engineer. But I did all kinds of other stuff. I ran camera, and then the important thing was that I became what was called a technical director, whereas the person that pushes the buttons to change the cameras to put them on TV. And I said, I think I'd rather be a director, actually doing the ones that say ready one, take one, ready two, take two. And I got a job as a director. And then I moved to Denver to direct the news. And I was working with producers. I really didn't like the news show we were working on. And the producer in the news department is the one who decides what the news is going to be that day. What's going to be in the program? How are we going to treat this story? How long is it going to be? Who's going to talk? That kind of thing. And then the director executes it and puts it on the air. So I got them to hire me as the producer, make me the producer of the news in Denver. And it was very successful. We went from a 21 share to a 48 share, and it became a dominant news program. And the company moved me to Louisville to run the news department. In Louisville, I was 27 years old. And we did real well there. But my weather lady, who was this wonderful personality on Louisville TV, decided she wanted to leave and pursue a career in country music. So I started trying to hire a meteorologist to replace her. And I thought, and I kept offering more and more and more money than I was making. And I thought, meteorology is kind of the confluence of broadcasting and science. Maybe I should do this. Maybe I should, get the big bucks. But maybe I should do something really different before I turned 30 and got too old to, do something new. So I did. I went back to Florida State, got a master's in meteorology and communications, and started doing the weather in Tallahassee when I was while I was in school. And when I graduated the next June, CNN was starting, and they hired me to be one of the first weather people. The three of us did that. I did the weekends. And then the ABC station in San Francisco hired me to come out and work there, which was a big deal to go to San Francisco and, work in TV. And then Ted Turner hired me to come and run the documentaries and magazine division at Turner Broadcasting, back to management again. But I did the weather on the local NBC station in Atlanta while I was doing that. Anyway, and all this ended up with me coming to Miami to do the weather. And I started on Channel 10 in Miami in 1983. At the same time, I was still doing some engineering and news consulting on the side. And then slowly that turned into just doing the weather full time. And then I ended up chief meteorologist at WTVJ in 1990. And we sat around saying, okay, what should we do to distinguish our weather from, the weather that had been being done on TV in Miami forever. And I said, let's do hurricanes. Nobody's paying attention to hurricanes here. There hadn't been a significant hurricane since 1965, even though there was a pretty good threat in 79 with Hurricane David. But really it was, nobody was thinking, oh, it's June 1st. Oh my God, it's hurricane season again. Nobody, there wasn't, the heart rate didn't go up a beat when June 1st came around back then. But I had studied Miami history, and Miami history is just rife with hurricanes and, important hurricanes. So I said, odds are it's going to happen again, but why not? Let's go ahead and do it. And they agreed, and we built a storm center, and we built a hurricane plan. We had a big, thick hurricane plan, and I was kind of in charge of implementing many aspects of it, and including one of the ideas that came to me was, we need a radio station, because if there's a bad hurricane here, nobody's going to have power to watch TV, and who knows what's going to happen with our condemned tower. Maybe it'll fall over. We need a radio station, and we need a direct connection to the radio station in case we can't transmit over TV. And we installed that. It was installed and tested 1 week before Hurricane Andrew hit. Anyway, we did this for 2.5 years, and not much had happened in the ratings. And there was a management change at NBC in New York, and they said, you need to make a change down there in Miami because you're not making any progress. And, you spend all this money on hurricanes, there's no hurricanes. And so I found a job at CBS in New York. And it was a pretty good job. And I was all set for my final interview. Final interview was on Monday morning, August 24th, 1992. And I was going to New York weekend and finalize it. And my replacement was flying in from New York that day. And that morning, Hurricane Andrew hit and sort of changed the world, flipped everything upside down. And of course, I couldn't leave Miami at that point, and I wouldn't have, and a million things happened after that, and I refocused myself on hurricanes as a result of that. But one of the in my life, one of the important things is I had that producing background, and that helped me with what we did in Hurricane Andrew. I was able to kind of manage the message, and I had thought out how the message should be conveyed in an extreme event like that. I wrote a book about this, by the way, about my sort of philosophy and thinking 5 years ago for the 25th anniversary. Still available on Amazon, my Hurricane Andrew story. But thinking it out ahead of time was a critical step, trying to imagine what could go wrong and what are you going to do about it.
Bryan, what was the attitude like in Miami pre-1992 to hurricanes? Was it sort of like blasé, like laissez-faire, like no one bothered to prep? And then you single-handedly increased Home Depot's stock price tenfold.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, nobody, everybody knew that you could have a hurricane, but it was not a major thing. Well, and what had really happened was there were all these hurricanes in the 60s. So the building code that was put in place in the early 70s was actually quite good. Really an excellent building code, as good as any hurricane building code around. And it was ready for the hurricanes of the 60s, where we were, it was either not terrible. Category 2 was the biggest one, 1964 in Miami. Hurricane Cleo came right over downtown Miami and on up, kind of up I-95. And I was up in Melbourne and we felt it up there. And then Betsy in 65. So you had 60, 64, and 65 kind of bang, 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 but none of them were super big. So the building code dealt with those just fine. But then by the 80s, people was really out of people's minds. And the idea of doing inspections to see if the new buildings were meeting the codes, all that kind of went away. So all these buildings were built in the 80s that did not have even that code in mind. They really skipped the lessons of the 60s even. So you had a whole set of subdivisions even that were just not built well, that were around when Hurricane Andrew happened in 1992. And the fact was that the building code of the 70s was not enough for Hurricane Andrew. I mean, Hurricane Andrew was so extreme. Hurricane Andrew was a 20, 25 mile wide, strong tornado. So things happened in that storm that, you just don't see happen. It's the rare thing that 2x4s are flying along at 30 feet off the ground and impale palm trees, and pieces of plywood slice through palm trees. If you just think about the forces involved in having a piece of wood fly along that high in the air to impale a palm tree, and 2x4s going through concrete block walls, and concrete beams 100 feet long flying 100 yards, and things like this that went on in that storm that just don't go on in normal hurricanes. It exploited every weakness in that 70s code, and and it had to be revised if we were going to prevent that kind of wholesale destruction, even of homes that were pretty well built, were severely damaged or destroyed. We ended up with well over 100,000 homes severely damaged and about 30,000 destroyed. So homes and businesses. So it was, and in an isolated part of Dade County too. If you drive south down out of Miami and you get to Dayland, to North Kendall Drive, the damage started getting worse. Then you got to Southwest 120th Street, and then that was it. It was all damage south of Southwest 120th Street. There was damage in downtown Miami, and Brickell was scary. The winds were strong enough in Brickell to take furniture out of one apartment and put it in another apartment lower down, like sofas and stuff like that. I mean, it was scary. But it didn't get the notoriety that it deserved, because you had that just unbelievable situation in South Dade where anarchy ensued, and the government response was poor and slow, and it was hellacious.
I mean, we sort of lucked out that Hurricane Andrew wasn't 10 miles north, like the eye wasn't 10 miles north of where it was, right? Because the population center of Miami wasn't in Homestead, right? So
right.
Sort of we got lucky that was the exurbs almost, of the...
Yes, and back then, extreme South Dade, like the Homestead area, Homestead was a separate town back then. Like you left Miami and you went through the agricultural fields. Now you were in Homestead, and they were very, very proud of that. It was kind of a pioneer town, down there. And now, of course, it's a whole different thing. It's all kind of continuous. When you drive down the turnpike there, you don't have a sense that, okay, Miami is over, or suburban Miami is over, and now Homestead is starting. It's all part of the same thing. But it's not just that Andrew missed the population center. Andrew also, which would have been unbelievable and horrendous and hard to imagine, but Andrew missed the business center. So Andrew, if it had come 10 miles farther north, 12 miles farther north, something like that, would have taken out the port of Miami completely, would have severely damaged South Beach. And back then, remember, South Beach was just in the reopening stage. There were still a lot of decrepit and dilapidated buildings that have since been turned into magnificent, refurbished buildings. It would have taken out the airport, the Miami International Airport. It would have, a lot of things would have happened that would have made it very difficult. The banking center, Brickell at that time was really a banking center and just beginning to be a residential center. It was not the neighborhood that people can live and thrive in that it is today. But those banks have to operate. The banks would have gone somewhere else to operate. So what Miami would be today is a very open question if Hurricane Andrew had taken all that out, because the cruise ships had, if there's no port of Miami, well, where are they going to go? They're going to set up operations somewhere else, because you don't just put it back. It would have been like in South Dade. It took years before it took about 5 years before it really felt like it was back. So maybe it wouldn't have taken that long to put the port back, but it would have taken a long time. And, would the port of Tampa have become the major port, or some other port become the major port, where they invested in Port Everglades instead of the port of Miami or something? All kinds of things would have been different if Andrew had come farther north.
Yeah, the one visual that always sticks in my mind that was covered in the news was like, I remember there being an apartment building and like one whole wall had fallen. So it looked like a dollhouse. So you could just look into every apartment, and that just like stayed with me all these years. But I think there were some key decisions that you made. You alluded to one earlier about kind of having the radio station so that you did like a 23-hour coverage. Like you were just the voice through the storm. We didn't have access to anything else at that point. So you just kind of talked us through the whole thing, which I think why you kind of have such a huge impact on the people in Miami. But you also would love for you to talk about how you save lives by telling people like, hey, grab a mattress and like hunker down and use that as your protection. So I feel like that day probably changed your life. So could you kind of speak a little bit to that whole experience?
Yeah, so the day definitely changed my life. The two things you're talking about are the two best ideas I ever had in my life. So it's overnight, Sunday night. The storm has started at midnight, the first outer rain bands. And we had said through that Sunday, okay, midnight is going to be our cutoff. Everybody needs to be in their place by midnight. And I thought that was, a safe time, because the way it worked back then, by the way, it wasn't like most storms that we think of today, where we have these sort of days in advance and so forth. Back then, most people became aware of it on Saturday. Now, this thing hit overnight, Sunday night, Monday morning, 5 a.m. Monday morning. So most people became aware Saturday. I went on TV on Friday afternoon and said, all right, folks, there's a potential storm out there. I want you to be aware of it and be ready to go into preparedness mode this weekend in case it comes this way. I didn't forecast it to come to South Florida. I was just concerned it was Friday. And back then, people didn't have cell phones like they do now. People kind of tuned out on the weekend. Many people went out on boats and went to the Keys and didn't pay any attention to the news over the weekend. Everybody's in touch all the time now. You can always call somebody on the phone. But that didn't exist back then. So what I said that Friday afternoon was, okay, just in case this happens, I want to be sure you check in tomorrow. And I got credit for being the only one to know the storm was coming. I didn't know the storm was coming. I just looked at the calendar and said, it's Friday, I'm going to say something different. It had been Tuesday, I probably wouldn't have done it. But because it was Friday and the weekend was coming, I did that on Friday afternoon. Then by Friday night, there was some kind of awareness, but it still looked like the storm was more likely to go north, like maybe Central Florida-ish. And Saturday morning, the forecasts still were for it to go north of Miami, like Palm Beach, Treasure Coast, more closer to Central Florida-ish, something like that. But then during the day, Saturday, it kept staying south, kept staying south, kept staying south. And so we really ramped up. I stood in front of a green screen that Saturday for hours and hours and hours with just a phone number on the green screen for people to call and ask questions, and just answered questions for hours and hours and hours. And then that Saturday night, 11 o'clock, we went on and on and on. By that time, most people were aware that Saturday night, and was after 1 o'clock, about quarter after 1. And I said to the producer, we got to stop this. This is like getting too late here, because we could have gone all night. There would have been no problem going all night. But I said on the air, friends, I'm going to go home now and get some sleep. And I suggest you do too, because we may not sleep tomorrow night. And tomorrow may be one of the biggest days in the history of our city. So let's rest now, and we'll pick it up in the morning and we'll go through it together. And so I did. I went home and slept for a few hours, and I came back in the morning and sat down at the desk at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we went through it. So it was, this constant ramping up. Okay. By that time, it was aiming at Miami or South Dade or maybe Fort Lauderdale, but it was coming in our direction. And remember, back then, people didn't have the same expectation of the hurricane being forecastable, the exact point being forecastable that they do now. So it was coming toward us was the point. And so we went through that every step by step that Sunday. And then by the time it was starting to happen and it was on the radar, I mean, it was clear this was going to be a worst case scenario. It looked like for South Dade at that point. And I thought, okay, people are in their homes. There's nobody on the road. I mean, everybody was, okay, ready. Nobody was ready for what happened, but everybody was as ready. They thought they were ready. But I thought in South Dade, this is not a big condo place, right? This isn't like hitting Brickell or something, or a large part of Miami now, Aventura or Sunny Isles Beach or Miami Beach or something. These are people in homes, single family homes. Okay. So now this worst case thing is coming. What can people do in their homes to, beyond what they've done already? Because there's nothing more that they can do with their homes. This is it, right? And I remembered a book I had read after the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926, written by a guy named L.F. Reardon. And it was about his family and what he did in their home in Coral Gables. So we can talk about the Great Miami Hurricane. I mean, it's it would be, if it happened again, the most expensive hurricane or natural disaster in the history of the United States by far. $250 billion hurricane or something like that. But what he did is he got a mattress off the bed and used that at one point to protect his family. And I thought, good idea. So I said, okay, friends, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get a mattress off the bed and get it ready, get it in your interior hallway, in a closet, in the bathroom. And this thing starts, get your family under there and ride this thing out. And that turned out to be one of the smartest things I ever said, because people got the mattresses off the bed, they got under the mattress, and then when it was over and they moved the mattress, they could see the sky because the house had crumbled around them, and nobody I heard got hurt doing that. I can't tell you the chilling stories of people that coming up to me crying because they got under the mattress. And
that gave me chills remembering that era, because I remember distinctly, I was probably like almost 10 years old, and my dad sort of pinning a dresser up against the front door because it was the only door that didn't have or area without shutters or whatever. My dad, for context, was very into sort of storms and hurricanes, and he worked at FIU, so he'd been to the hurricane center there, and he'd taken me on tours and all this stuff. So it was probably more top of mind for him on a regular basis before Andrew. But yeah, I remember seeing the pictures in the Miami Herald of, people's houses gone, and then a mattress sitting on top of a bathtub, because that was all that was left of, their house and stuff.
There was a big dilemma, because I had told people, okay, put a plastic sheet in the bathtub and then fill it with water, about 3/4 high, because that would be the water you would use to flush the toilet and to kind of shower and things like that after a storm if you don't have running water. But then it came to, wait a minute, the bathtub is the safest place to be. Oh, did we take the water out? How do we get the water out of the bathtub? It was just a thing, you know. Anyway, but people made it through. Everybody made it through with the mattress and the bathtub. So that was number one thing, probably the biggest thing. The second one was 3 o'clock in the morning. The wind is starting to howl, and I look up at the roof of the studio. This old building is downtown Miami, where a WTVJ was located at the time. And I thought, gee, you know, if this really starts going and an air conditioner flies off the high rise across the street and crashes into the building here, I don't know if this is the best place to be. So I said to the floor director and the production manager, can't we find a safer place than under this roof? And immediately I thought, wow, that's an idea, because we're telling everybody else to go to a safe place. Our sitting in this glossy studio is not the right image here, the right tone, right? Anyway, it turned out, again, to be a really good idea, because when we got up and moved at 3:30, I can't tell you how many people told me after the fact, holy crap, they're moving, you know, they're not fooling around here, right? And we went into the storage closet, just happened to be right in front of where we were sitting. And we talked on the air about the whole preparation process and why we were moving, and that we were going to move at 3:30. And that's what we did. We got up and moved at 3:30, and it turned out to be kind of an iconic moment. But mostly it turned out to be inspirational for people to get out of their bedrooms and out of their kitchens and get to their hallway and their closet and their bathroom and you know, and wait it out. And they didn't have too terribly long to wait, because the wind was already picking up.
Yeah, that probably must have been when we moved. So we were, at the time, I grew up in the hammock, so thankfully not country walk, because that was, you know, also
Right.
devastated. But we were on the hallway of our second floor, and it was my parents, my two sisters, and I, and our dog, and we ended up going downstairs to a half bath where we all shoved ourselves in, but it was the only place without windows and first floors, we thought. And that's kind of where we wrote out the rest.
That was the right place. That was definitely the right place. Yeah.
It's probably because of you. It's probably right at 3:30 when you said move.
Well, when we moved, yeah, you know, because people, you know, they hear people say on television, do this, do that. I learned in that example, you know, don't tell people to do something and then not do it. Right. I mean, I didn't set up the idea of moving because I thought that would be inspirational, but quickly I realized that was going to be inspirational. Then we really sold it, and it really did work.
So I would love to kind of talk kind of now moving forward. We have a lot of folks who have moved to Miami, have not experienced a storm. We already had our first storm of the season kind of early on. What would your advice be to new folks who are trying to understand how do I even prepare, or how do I know when it's serious, when to leave? And now there's, you know, both folks who are living in homes, and also so many of the folks now live in condos here. Right. What's kind of your advice?
Well, first thing is that post Andrew, to the credit of some really brave people in government in Miami-Dade County, mostly a guy named Charlie Danger, of all things, who ran the Miami-Dade County Building Department. They created a building code that is second to none in the world. So any new building, any building that is up to the modern Miami-Dade code, Miami-Dade building code, is designed with Hurricane Andrew in mind, which is a top end event. The idea is these buildings will stand and they will be safe to be in. Now, you wouldn't want to stay in a building next to the windows, but you know, in the hallways, inside the building on a lower floor, the buildings are going to be safe. The buildings are not going to fall down. We have confidence in that, and people in the world have confidence in the Miami-Dade building code. Shamefully, only Broward County uses basically the same building code. The rest of Florida has decided that it's not necessary. But in any case, in Miami, all these new buildings, in fact, you know, if you go in one of these new high rises and you know, grandma can't open the sliding door because it's like a bank vault, you know, to open it. And that's built with Hurricane Andrew in mind. So, you know, have confidence in that. Now, we still have to be very conscious of where evacuation zones are, and evacuation zones are not for wind. Evacuation zones are for when Biscayne Bay could get pushed up and flood areas and strand people and potentially kill them if they're at ground level. But in terms of wind, which in Hurricane Andrew for the most part was a wind event because the storm surge was concentrated in a non-populated part of South Dade. These buildings are ultra strong. So feel good about that. But any significant hurricane will be very disruptive. So if you're going to live in Miami and you're going to operate in Miami, you got to think like, if you're going to operate in the north, you're going to have provisions in some way for cold weather, right? You're going to deal with life in a cold climate. If you're going to operate in Los Angeles or San Francisco or Seattle or Memphis, earthquake-prone places, you're going to have some kind of earthquake plan. So you got to have a hurricane plan. You just got to, operate your life and your business with hurricanes in mind. So from a personal standpoint, the thing that's changed so much in the world today is that most businesses can operate pretty well remotely, right? In general, you don't need the infrastructure right there anymore to operate. So you need to have multiple levels of plan. Like Hurricane Irma is an example of a storm where you have a lot of time. I mean, we knew Irma was coming to Florida a week in advance. The forecast was for it to come to Florida and okay, deviate a little bit here and there, but it was coming to Florida, right? The Florida Peninsula was going to get hit by Hurricane Irma. So people that had the wherewithal and the ability to get out of town, I told them, leave way early. Take a vacation. Go operate somewhere else. Why would you want to stay when you know the power is going to go out? You know it's going to be disruptive. It wasn't destructive so much as disruptive. And go operate somewhere else and let this go by. Button up your home or apartment and let this go by. So that's a very good plan for that kind of storm. But the thing is, you also have to have a plan for a Hurricane Andrew situation where it happens so quickly that you may not be able, as a practical matter, to get out of town because it's just, it's a lot of people trying to move and you may or may not be able to do it quickly. Okay, so then what are you going to do? You need to protect your property in some kind of way that once it's over, and protect your vehicles so that then you can get out of town and figure out how you're going to operate. So you have to have various scenarios in mind, some that you have time, you're going to leave early before the mad rush to get going, and others that, okay, the last minute you got to stay, but you're going to have your safe place and you're going to have your way to protect your property, which includes your car. Cars are tricky. Generally, you don't want to leave cars outside because that's when stuff falls on them and then you don't have a car. And imagine you have a terrible hurricane and then your transportation is not good. So where are you going to park it? Where's the parking garage? The city, Miami Beach, city of Miami opens parking garages for anybody that wants to park in a garage. Then how are you going to get from the garage to your home? Or maybe your building has a garage. You don't want to put it on the floor. You don't want to, or on the ground. You don't want to put it out in the open. Give yourself options. Think out exactly what you're going to do if there's a terrible storm. Most people can imagine a terrible storm, right? A terrible, disruptive storm is what a hurricane is to one degree or the other.
Yeah, I wanted to just touch on that for our listeners. As you mentioned, City of Miami and the Miami Parking Authority have a program that you can apply for a permit to park in one of their garages during one of these events. And I think the window to register closes on June 30th. So I recommend anyone in the city to do that. I didn't realize Miami Beach has that too. It's great.
Yeah, I don't think you need a permit in Miami Beach. You just need to be a resident of Miami Beach. And you should check that. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll include links when we post this so everyone can make sure to get that done.
The most important hurricane supply of all hurricane supplies is an inflatable water bottle. So that, people go to the store and then they end up with these gallon jugs of water. It's insanity. And then they go, oh my, there's no water in the store. Turn on the freaking tap. If you have something to put the water in, that's all you need. And they make these jugs, they're 5-gallon jugs. You get them on Amazon or you get them at camping supply stores, whatever. And they fold up, they sit on the shelf, and they're nothing for year after year after year until you need a supply of water. You put it under the tap, you fill it up, and then you don't have to worry about water, because water is a pain in the ass. It's heavy. It's just a pain. So if you have your water, that's the first big step. It's super easy to have enough food, to go get a bunch of food bars and peanut butter and crackers and stuff that you can store in a box. That's really straightforward. But water is the one thing that people usually fail on, and they run out of water. It's a big thing.
So one of the things I'm really curious about, like you mentioned Irma, which we had sort of like a week heads up on. So these models that you guys as meteorologists rely on for forecasting, they're getting better and better every year, right?
Right.
How far out do we think we're going to be able to predict these things? Like, is there going to be a point where a month out or a year out, we know Florida's going to get hit 8 times, New Orleans will get hit 7, so on and so forth? Like, what are your predictions in that space?
No, I don't think we're ever going to know much more than a week or 10 days. The atmosphere is a chaotic system. By definition, a chaotic system cannot always be forecast. There's too many small factors that can turn into make big changes down the road. A small undetectable factor, on Sunday can make a big change by Saturday. And since it's undetectable, by definition, you can't forecast Saturday sometimes. So the rule of forecasting hurricanes is that strong storms are well forecast. Strong, well-developed storms like Irma was a super big hurricane. I mean, it crushed Barbuda, which is the island at the top right northeast corner of the Caribbean there, near Antigua. So it was a big, well-developed hurricane well out there. So if it's a well-developed hurricane and it's moving, the forecasts in general are going to be quite good for those storms. But if it's just developing, disorganized, or slow moving, forecasts are going to have more errors and are going to change. So in the case of a Hurricane Andrew, that was on the Thursday before. Remember, it hit Sunday night. On the Thursday before, it did not even have a circulation. It only really was a well-developed tropical storm on Friday, didn't become a hurricane until Saturday morning, 48 hours exactly before it hit as the super category 5. So those kind of storms, the forecasts are never going to be great in that development stage. I think it would be forecast better than it was then, but that would be a short fuse storm. As a matter of fact, every of the 4 category 5 storms that have hit the United States in the record book. Records go back to 1851. We're not too sure about the 19th century, obviously, but we have records there. Of the 4 that have hit, all 4 of them were a tropical storm 3 days out. And they end up hitting as a category 5. So that's what I say, that every hurricane plan needs to have 2 different branches. One is when we have time, and the other is when we don't have time. That something happens very quickly.
From a science and engineering perspective, is there anyone doing any interesting or getting much progress on anything to sort of slow the growth of the storms, or is that pure science fiction? How do we? Well,
there are people. There are people that talk about it. There are people that, for example, have ideas about how to cool the ocean under the storm, and therefore make it not have as much fuel and so forth. The problem is that it's a lot of resources, a lot of energy, a lot of money, and you have to ask yourself, are we better off trying to tame one hurricane when there could be another one next week, or taking that money and invest it in making our communities stronger and more resilient to storms? And because then you're better ready for every storm that comes along. There's nothing to say that you don't get multiple storms in a year, let alone a decade. And if you go back In Miami history, I mentioned the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926, which was an astounding storm. It was a Category 4 hurricane. The center of the circulation came ashore down in what is today Palmetto Bay. Back then it was Bryan, but the city of Palmetto Bay, or the village of Palmetto Bay, down there, that's where the center came ashore. But it substantially destroyed Dania and Hollywood, and huge damage in Fort Lauderdale. I mean, as well as Miami. The water came completely over Miami Beach. The ocean water came completely over Miami Beach and into downtown Miami and through downtown Miami. So it was just gargantuan. It was this monster storm. Compare that in size to Hurricane Andrew that only came ashore a few miles farther south, but really didn't, just the outer edges of it reached just downtown Miami, let alone Broward, which is outer bands in Broward. They got some gusty winds, some trees down, some power out, but it was really a fringe event in Broward. So you have all these different scales. But in the first part of the 20th century, you had 7 hurricanes. In the first 7 decades of the 20th century, 7 hurricanes come over downtown Miami. And that doesn't count the Category 4 that hit Homestead that also affected downtown. The Category 4 that hit Fort Lauderdale is not in that list, but 7 directly over downtown Miami, 2 of them Category 4. So Miami is a hurricane-prone place. In the late 1940s, you had just in South Florida in general, a Category 4 hit the Homestead area, Miami area in 1945. Category 4 hits Fort Lauderdale in 1947. Category 4 comes across the state, ends up hitting Miami, not as a 4, but as a 2 or a 3, I think, in 1948. Category 4 hits Palm Beach in 49. Category 4 hits Miami in 1950. And that doesn't count another one, a second hurricane in 47 and a second hurricane in 48. So you had all these hurricanes, bang, 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 so it can happen. And the good thing is that now we build buildings with these hurricanes in mind, but it would be disruptive. And like I said, living in South Florida means living with hurricanes. So there's nothing to do but to be prepared, bottom line.
Yeah. And so I feel like one thing that we joke about is like when one we think is coming and it doesn't really do anything, you have all those memes online where people then don't take it seriously. So make sure to take this seriously. Each one has a potential to, be very catastrophic.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really important point, Marie. The fact is that you prepare about 4 times for every time you really needed to prepare. That's the state of the science. It's just no better than that. If we can make it better than that, we'd make it better than that, right? But it is no better than that. So that needs to be part of the realization and part of the plan. And I do think it's important. We were talking about businesses earlier and what businesses need to do. After Hurricane Andrew, a really big, huge challenge for every entity that had to operate, the airport, for example, was where were they going to get people to operate the business? Because the people had destroyed homes, people that didn't have shutters on their homes or whatever. They had to take care of their homes and their families and their lives and everything, and they couldn't come to work. Well, who was going to operate the business? So what I encouraged after Andrew and a lot of talks I did and talking with business is that they make part of HR the question of where do you live? How do you live? How's the hurricane protection where you live? What's your plan for taking care of your stuff so that you can be an employee afterward? Like maybe the company makes a deal with a shutter company to give discounts for shutters for people that work there or things like that, right? Where there's some guidance on helping employees be hurricane ready because they won't be able employees after a storm if they're not.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense to build that into these resiliency plans for every company, because, especially the more and more you're paying an employee to do stuff, white collar work and stuff like that, the more their time is valuable, right? So it makes sense to spend a few $1,000 to give them Airbnb credits so they can go up 100 miles north and keep working, or whatever it is.
Whatever it is. That's exactly right. Right. But also to protect their home because, the fact is, if your home gets wrecked, because you don't have shutters on the house or whatever, you don't have the right front door, your front door, swings in. And I mean, it's kind of basic stuff. We know how to do it now. We know how to keep homes from getting wrecked. You have a Category 5 hurricane, you're going to have damage, but doesn't have to be wrecked. And if it's just a little superficial damage, you can wait to deal with that. But some things you can't wait to deal with, and you don't want your employees stuck in a situation where they have to deal with their home and their family, and they just have to. So you want to try and mitigate that. If, like you say, if you have white collar employees that can actually physically operate, it's not like they're doing something physical at the business. They can operate somewhere else. That should be part of the plan.
Yeah, and one thing I want to touch on for the folks who are newer to Miami, you mentioned this a bit, like, if we know about it early enough, try to leave if you can. Obviously, that's a very privileged thing to be able to leave, but also don't assume that, the day before the storm, you're just going to get on the road and get out of Miami very easily, because everybody decides to get on the road at that point. And then it creates bumper to bumper traffic. The gas stations run out of gas. So leave early. If you are going to drive, try to leave as early as possible. But I just wanted to give that caveat, because I don't think folks who didn't grow up here know that. And it always makes me anxious to get in the car, like to try to leave. I'll try to fly out, but the roads just get a lot more complicated.
Yeah, if you think about it, I mean, how many roads are there going north, right? There's I-95 and the Turnpike and I-75 in Florida. That's all there are, right? And if you have a storm, well, in the Irma situation, remember you had the evacuations from the West Coast and the East Coast, and they all converge, right? So, this is not a good scenario for evacuating. And the worst thing that could happen, if you can imagine being on the road, being on the Turnpike somewhere where it's 15 miles to the next exit and the hurricane is coming and you're caught in traffic. I mean,
and there was that one storm that it kept like my sister went to like Tampa, and then then it turned and went to Tampa, and then they went to Atlanta, and it just kept turning. So you don't really know.
Yeah. I mean, the fact is, this is not a good situation because, I know what was the storm? It was a Miami something. Well, anyway, a lot of people went to Tampa. Maybe that was most recent one was Irma. They went to Tampa, and then of course the storm went up the West Coast, and people are calling me frantically. Oh, we're in Tampa. It's coming this way. Should we come back? And this is a challenge for sure. So, the tricky thing is we don't want everybody to evacuate. We don't want that. We want people to stay in town in a safe place, but we also don't want everybody to stay, because the more people you have in a disrupted city, the more challenges you have, right? So you kind of want to balance there. So the fact is that people that are privileged and can leave early, that's actually good for everybody if they can button up their place and feel confident about it and get out of town. Because if something were to happen to their situation and they would need some help, well, they're not going to need help if they're out of town, right? So you kind of want both things to happen. You want people that can go and can go safely and can afford to go, but you need people to stay as well and feel confident of where they are, that they're in a strong building. And we have lots and lots and lots of strong homes. Every home that's been built since 1995, and especially those built in the 2000s, every high-rise building that's new, everyone that's been renovated, they're all up to this extremely strong code, and we can feel good about that.
Bryan, one last question before we let you go. So what are your thoughts or predictions for this hurricane season? Are we going to be expecting a lot of storms, or is it going to be a mild one, or is that too early to say that?
Well, you never know for sure, because it doesn't really matter how many storms there are. The question is how many hit. right? And, in 1992 was a very slow season, but Hurricane Andrew
Sure.
hit. So, but it looks the atmospheric and ocean system look about like last year. So that's why you see predictions. Last year, remember, there were 21 named storms, and you see predictions in the 1920-ish range in terms of named storms. We've had one already, but which was inconsequential as a storm because it didn't get named until it was offshore heading out into the ocean, but it was consequential, obviously, in terms of its rainfall. And tropical systems and cities always cause disruption. And South Florida is sort of largely paved over now. So when you get 15 inches of rain anywhere, it's going to flood. There's just no way around it. I mean, that's true of pretty much anywhere. But it used to be in South Florida, you had a lot of open space. So the flooding kind of subsided more quickly. Now it's more likely to happen, and it doesn't subside as quickly when you get heavy rain. So anyway, bottom line on this hurricane season is it doesn't make any difference what the forecast is. You got to prepare and be ready because it only takes one.
Right. Bryan, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. This is truly an honor. Maria and I both, you're like a celebrity. Well, you are a celebrity.
My mom is finally going to think my job is cool now that I've had you on the podcast.
Say hi to your mom.
But thank you so much. How can people follow you? What are the best ways for them to, keep up with the latest stuff that you're creating and all that?
Well, first of all, on Twitter, it's at B Norcross. On Facebook, it's Brian Norcross Weather. If you do Facebook Brian Norcross Weather, you'll see my post. I'm working now. I should tell this just for 1 second. So, I replaced Max Mayfield when he was at Channel 10 in Miami, and Max replaced Bob Sheets. And I just decided at this point in my life that I had done a lot of 24 plus hour days sleeping on the floor. And, it was time for me to hand it off because I had a really good guy to hand it off to. And I want you all to come to know Michael Lowry on Channel 10. He's the hurricane specialist. I worked with him at the Weather Channel. He's one of the smartest people I know. So he's taken over for me at Channel 10. And there's a new weather channel service called Fox Weather. If you download Fox Weather on your phone or go on foxweather.com, you'll see an app and you can actually watch the channel on your phone, on your iPad, online, on Roku, on YouTube TV, various other sources. So when hurricanes pop up, I'm doing work with Fox Weather, as you see here. So anyway, but I do it from Miami. I'm still part of the, Miami is my town, and I'll be watching out for everybody.
Thank you so much.
It's great. It's great to see you. And great to. This is wonderful what you do. I mean, to see. I've been around nearly 40 years in Miami, and to see it evolve into the tech center that it is, and every other kind of center, it's been quite an amazing experience.
Amazing. We need to get you out to some of these events.
Yes. Thank you.